There's no get-rich-quick scheme.
No.
You can try all the get-rich schemes you want. That's been my biggest failure in my life is I've tried a few of them.
Right.
It's a long-term drip. You just have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it.
Today, we're going to talk to a friend of mine who I go eat breakfast with on a regular basis. And I know we're talking about all things money and finance on this channel all the time. And everyone knows I'm a real estate agent. So I brought in one of my good buddies, Martin McClellan, who is an actual financial planner, has been doing this for a long time. So Martin, I just want to thank you for coming on.
Absolutely.
And as always, we're talking to young people. Why we like to talk to young people is because both of us have kids that are still young people. And we're trying to help them on their journey to figuring out the financial freedom that we're all hoping to get to. And so that's why I brought you on. I want to be able to ask you questions from a different perspective than what I have so that we can hopefully educate some people and have them learn that a lot of what you might see on social media and the crazy ideas and things you see out there are not necessary to do to get somewhere financially.
Yeah. Just cut to the point and bare bones it so they can understand.
And I tell people, you can try crazy things if you want, but if you do all the smart fundamental things first, and then you want to try something a little crazy, but that's not going to affect your fundamentals, then, by all means, go ahead and do that. So to me, what would you say is the biggest misconception that people have about just investing and getting, hopefully financial free someday?
I think it's not people, it's the young generation. It's those in their 20s and 30s misconceptions that they need a lot of money,
right?
That they have time to wait. The misconception there is that they don't understand the value of compound interest. You earn a percent, and then that percent earns a percent, and that percent earns a percent. So you got to start young, and it's difficult. But if you put $20,000 away in your 20s to 30s, it'll grow to a larger value than if you put $60,000 away in your 30s to 40s. So it's the right time is to start now and just get a habit. Develop the habit of putting some money away for yourself.
It's so funny you say that. I read a book. It was called The Automatic Millionaire. And they had a section. This was back in the days when you could only put $2,000 into your retirement account. And I remember this saying, if you started at 18 and stopped at 25, and someone else started at 25 and did it till they were 65, the person who started at 18 would have more money than the person who started at 25. And people look at you like that's crazy. In today's world, you can go online and look at investment calculators and play with the numbers. And it's amazing what happens if you're in your 20s and 30s and you have 30, 40 plus years of time for this to compound. It's amazing how little money you need to start off with for it to grow to numbers that are pretty darn big.
In my career, I have had family members that were the children and sometimes the grandchildren. And we got them to put $25 away a month, then to $50 away a month, then to $100 away a month. And I get calls today from those kids, can't wait to get their account to us because of the fact they have it.
Yes.
And now what do we do with it?
Right.
Because they started young and they made it a habit. And that's the important thing. You need to make it a habit.
So how do you recommend that they get started? So what would be a way for them? Because I know people think, hey, I do need a lot of money to get started. And it's funny because my daughter, who's obviously everyone knows and sees these days, who's getting ready to turn 24, we started, and she had no clue even where to begin, even with me being her dad. And so where would you tell people to get this process started?
We talked earlier about the technology that we have today. And the kids today have this opportunity to go online to a number of good financial websites. They can buy fractional shares of stock. They can buy fractional shares of mutual funds. And they just need to set up an online account in their 20s and 30s. They don't need really a whole lot of knowledge, and they need to not listen to what's going on in the news because they don't need this money until they're 60 or 70. And they need to invest in a good Standard & Poor's 500 fund and do automatic investments every month. Start at 25, start at 50, start at 100, and utilize the dividend reinvest option of that and see what that does in 10 years. It will blow their minds at what kind of money. They got to be resolute and
continue.
I want a new car. Well, I'm going to sell this. No. This is money you don't touch, but you need to use on that online methodology retirement vehicles where you're not paying tax on your growth.
And when you say Standard & Poor's, I know the terms I typically hear would be Dow Jones or the NASDAQ. So what is that?
Well, the S&P 500 is 500 companies that are rotated in and out over the years that create the S&P 500 index.
Right.
The Dow Jones is a 30 fund index of 30 stocks, right? So the S&P 500 has a larger diversification. You can go into even larger funds, but the S&P 500 is such that it makes a good diversification into all sorts of equity over the long run without them having to look at it. They're constantly growing by the 500 biggest and best companies in the world in that index.
And those companies will change over time. I tell people it's not the same 500 companies that it was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago.
Right.
Those things will continually change over time. Do you think it makes sense for them, especially if you're like starting off from $0 rather than just jumping online, is to go find someone like yourself or find someone to go talk to how to, like, the best way to get this thing going?
Yeah, they could go talk to me. That would be great.
Right.
And I'd love it. Or any other financial advisor.
Right.
That wants to take the time for a $25 account. Not many advisors do, right? And the younger generation, they want to look at the phone. They want to be able to see everything right there quickly. That's the way we're going. My industry is going to be very, very light in the next 10 to 15 years because we've got artificial intelligence that's now showing that it can compete.
Right.
But, go back to Warren Buffett, the S&P 500 over a period of 10 years has beat most of the analysts out there and all their great picks, and you don't need to make it confusing. The one thing that frustrates me is the input that we have and the news that we have. We have all these guys in suits and ties and screaming and yelling and talking this and talking that. TV shows. You got better things to do. Your career, your family, your home, your hobbies, the money will grow. it will grow. And I have thoughts on that to share, but it will grow if you do it. You have to do it.
Well, we tell people all the time, like when you really look at those things, and I like to read a lot of books, but when you read these books, you learn about the basic things. They talk about hedge fund managers and all these people. If you just kind of stay in the ETFs and mutual funds and just sort of don't get too complicated with things, you're going to earn your 8, 9, 10%, whatever it might be. Everyone has a different number. And then they want to talk about before inflation and after inflation and all that. I go, at the end of the day, just keep doing it. And when you have lots of money at the end, then you can have that argument with somebody when you're trying to figure out what to do with your 6, 8, 10, $12 million of, now I got to pay tax or not pay taxes. I did it in a 401k or a Roth IRA or whatever it is. But if you're not doing it, there's going to be nothing to even worry about anyway.
Exactly. And you mentioned the reading of books,
yes.
Okay? And this is an important one for young generation, okay? And my dad taught it to me when I first got in this business at 25, 26. The Richest Man in Babylon. It's not a hard read. It's 80 pages.
It's a little book.
But what it says is save 10% of what you earn every time you get a paycheck. Pay yourself first.
100%.
You worked so hard to earn that dollar. Take a dime and put it to you. And then make that money work as hard for you as you did for it. Don't take on debt. And make sure, and you're going to love this plug, make your home a valuable investment. Right? The rest of it will fall into place over 10, 15, 20 years.
All right.
You don't do that, which I didn't do until I was into my 30s, you're behind. Right? And I've been fortunate enough to catch up. But I look at our kids and what they're doing with their investments, and I go, wow, I did not have that kind of wealth when I was 28 years old, 29 years old.
Well, and that's the key, is getting them started. I see a lot of content. Obviously, I follow a lot of real estate stuff about, people talking about you should just rent and take all your money and invest it into other real estate because they want you to treat your primary residence not as an investment. And I go, depending on where you live in different parts of the country, you got to be careful when people are talking about all these, just rent because it's cheaper to rent than buy. I go, because, they always want to say, well, your rent's going to be the least amount you're going to pay and your mortgage is going to be, or I'm sorry, your rent's the most money you're going to pay every month, which isn't true, actually.
Right.
and your mortgage is the least you're going to pay every month. But I'm like, in most markets, it's not these dramatic differences where I could go rent a house for $2,000 a month and the same house, the mortgage payment's going to cost me $5,000 a month. It's not that great a difference. But if owning does become a little more expensive, great. At the end of 30 years, you're going to actually have an asset that might be worth $1 million versus nothing.
Well, a perfect example is a group of entrepreneurs that go out and start a company in 2005. Instead of leasing a building, they buy the building.
Right.
And 25 years later, they own the asset and they get a huge check every month for the rent. When you're in your 20s and 30s, it's not a balance of whether or not rent is better or mortgage is better. Mortgage is better over a 30, 40, 50-year time frame. And as you get to a point where you have equity in that house, then maybe in your 30s or 40s, you can diversify with a rental property if you so want to, or upgrade or buy land or what have you. But these financial analysts that say, oh, you should just be in stock, you should not, that's wrong.
Yeah. They're looking at it as a snapshot. You need to make your
home a valuable investment.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times they're looking at it as a snapshot in time.
Sure.
So like, for example, I bought some rental properties a few years ago and I was able to buy them in the 3 and 4% ranges, which obviously should never really have happened.
Right.
And now they're looking at rates a year ago, you could get 8%. Now when we're doing this, we're somewhere close to 7% again. And you always look at this snapshot in time they're always talking about being an entrepreneur, always making yourself better, always invest. It's like, you got to live somewhere and you might as well make that work for you as well. And I always say, people who own real estate and they own a primary residence are typically anywhere 35 to 40 times wealthier than people that have rented their whole life.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to me how many people have rented for me forever and ever and ever. That whole story is another thing for
Makes
another
you
day.
Wealthy.
It does make me wealthy, but it's always funny because they just want to take at one moment in time, you could look at today, and maybe today, that specific house at today's rates and that rent, it might make more sense for the next 12 months that makes more sense to rent it.
Sure.
But long term, I would say I don't know a lot of renters that got wealthy long term unless they had a job that just paid some ridiculous amount of income.
And that's the other topic that is very important to remember.
Yeah.
There's no get rich quick scheme.
No.
You can try all the get rich schemes you want. That's been my biggest failure in my life is I've tried a few of them.
Right.
It's a long-term drip. You just have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And just like what we experienced over the last 3 weeks, we've had a 22% correction in the market. So your dollar went down to 78 cents and now it's back up to 84 cents or 86 cents.
Right.
That's not material because as you're compounding and you're reinvesting your dividends, guess what? That dividend is buying more shares at the lower price.
Yeah.
And that over a 20-year period is phenomenally valuable.
And that's where people sometimes forget because you don't lose unless you sold in the last few weeks.
Right.
And I know there's people, I can promise you there's people in the last few weeks, Martin, that we know that got broke in the last 3 weeks and got rich in the last 3 weeks because they were doing crazy things. And I know there's all kinds of complicated investment strategies when the market is bouncing around the way it is. I'm sure there are people got wealthy, but that's not for most people in their everyday world. And I always tell people, if you do all the what we call get rich slow, you and I know how to help people get rich slowly.
Sure.
If you're doing all those things, you could always try over here to buy some individual stock or do the cryptocurrency or do something to try to get yourself rich quicker. And if that hits a home run, great, good for you. But you got to make sure you're doing all this fundamental stuff first, which goes right back into risk. And I think when people talk about these things, they don't always talk about risk because you know what? Some people are more suited to just go to work, punch the clock, go 8 to 5, figure out how to earn an income and play the slow, steady game.
Sure.
And other people, their risk tolerance is, I want to start a business. I want to try to hit a home run. And there's pros and cons to all these things. So what do you take to people when they're talking about risk factors and how they should look at risk just in general terms?
Well, the concept for me in risk is not whether you're going to be an 8 to 5, punch a clock, put into your 401k, come home, watch TV, never go outdoors, blah, blah, blah. My risk tolerance is based on age, right? In investing. So at the age of 20 to 30, they want to be growth oriented. Now I don't particularly advocate for aggressive growth oriented. The most aggressive investments over 100-year period only earned 1% more in the long run on average per year. The thing is that aggressive investing scares people to make a mistake, and most of them didn't get near that return because they sold. They panicked, they sold, then they didn't know when to get back in, and they missed it. So the reality of risk is age-based. 20 to 30s, you're a growth investor, 100% stock.
Right.
When you're 60 and 70, now you can look back at those investments and say, do I need to change it from my 100% stock? Because now I'm making like $250,000 a year in dividends.
Right.
I don't really need to go to fixed income to get me more income.
Right.
I'll let my heirs deal with this money and I'll live comfortably for the next 20 years or so on my dividends.
And it's funny you say that because I was just talking with my stepmom who's 82 years old. And when the stock market went all wonky, I said to her, I go, how you feeling about all this? And she goes, oh, I'm down like 1%. And so she obviously has reallocated her funds into a position of someone who is 82 years old.
Absolutely.
Which should be completely different than someone who is 22 years old. And the same thing, we're having the conversation with my daughter who just started all this and did her Roth IRA for last year and this year. So she fully funded, put her $14,000. And I told her, I said, guess what? You probably don't have $14,000 in your account, and that's okay. And she wasn't worried about it at all because at least she understands the basic fundamental concepts of the things that we're talking about. And again, everybody's tolerances are different, but I just find that people that either try to get rich quick by lots of different ways. I was talking to someone the other day who I know, her brother now is a wealthy person. And what happened, though, to get wealthy is he tried to start his own business multiple times, over and over and over, fail, hit the home run. And now he's financially rich, but he has no relationship with his kids. He's been divorced a couple times. So, at some point, it's like I always tell people, life isn't meant to do alone.
It's a give and take.
Yes, and it's this level of, I would say, if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish and everybody's goals are different, then figure out what your goals are and don't worry about everybody else.
So another point from my book, The Richest Man in Babylon, not my book, apologize, the one I recommend, is that you don't get involved in things you don't know.
100%.
So you see, we're talking about investment risk. That's one thing.
Right.
That's life risk. Okay, if you're a carpenter and you use wood and you want to make a lot of money, then you build with wood. But if all of a sudden a new technology comes out that lets you build in concrete, but that's not your forte, you might not want to have the time or take the time to go into that medium to try to increase your wealth. Maybe you slowly transition, but you don't just stop one and jump to the other. That's a life risk. And to be wealthy, you need to stay focused on what your specialty or what your knowledge allows you.
Stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane.
And so with that being said, this leads right back into debt, because you see lots of people saying, if you listen to someone like Grant Cardone or the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I never say his name right, Kiyosaki, whatever his name is, then they're always talking about debt. And they leverage themselves to a point where they say, I own billions of dollars of assets and this, that, and the other. And it's when in your mind, debt, like how is that like in? Because to me, debt's a risk thing. When is smart? When is not so smart? Good, bad, all the things that you hear about debt.
You're going to like the plug. Your first home.
Yes.
And maybe if you decide to increase your real estate diversification.
Mortgages.
Right. Credit card debt.
Bad.
You asked me the other day what was one of the biggest mistakes I made in my life. And it was really cool at, 2021 to have 40,000 in credit cards, right?
Yeah, right.
And then you had to try to pay all that off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I look at the use of debt for real estate because it's an appreciable asset. You can improve it.
Right.
You can put $1 into that asset, that real estate, and maybe get $2 or $3 out if you care for that real estate. My wife and I have done that twice now.
Right.
And the reality for us is that it's sweat equity, right?
Yeah.
But any other debt is not. Now, there could be education debt, right?
Or business, starting a business debt. How do you feel about that?
Business. And these are in different categories of debt. But just having debt to go out and buy a $120,000 McLaren, or maybe it's a $220,000, that's ridiculous.
Well, and this is where I talk about a lot of times with young people, they get what I call the trifecta of debt, right? They start off and maybe they made it through high school, they had a job, they might even have a little bit of money in their pocket, and then they go to college on student loans. While they're in college, I remember being in college and I couldn't believe how every time I turned around I was getting another credit card application without a job. They're like, please spend your money so we can get you in credit card debt. And then you're still driving around the same car you had when you were 16. So you get out of college, you got student loan debt, you got credit card debt, and now you get your first job and you go buy a car on a car loan. And now you've hit the trifecta home run of debt, debt, and debt that are all bad. And now you're trying to start off your life, and someone else maybe you get married to has the same three things. And now to me, that's just a really shitty, hard place to start from. And so, I mean, I think there's some ways, like you said, obviously I'm a big proponent of mortgages, but again, at the same time, being careful with those. But businesses and other things, sometimes people take on some debt trying to do the right thing, and then they get themselves in a bad spot, which we have to coach them to and help fix of debt. Yeah. And so, like I said, sometimes they do other kinds of debt that work out, like they're trying to either start a business or maybe they went into something they weren't well versed at, right? And they cause themselves some debts. But what's your thoughts?
Well, you got to try.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with trying, but you got to make sure that you separate life from business. You can't risk your life, living, your expenses, your security, your warmth, your food, to do a business. You have to make sure that you have both avenues covered. Like you said, when you're investing, you can't put the roof on a house first. You need to pour some concrete. You have to have a foundation. Right. Okay, once you have this foundation, then you can go out and buy the Apples or the Microsofts or the AIs or the Facebooks or whatever and see if that will work for you. But you don't risk your life for those speculations. The same thing as business is a speculation, but you need to make sure you're in the proper lane to be able to be successful.
Right.
And that's difficult for some people. They say, well, I think I can do this. Okay. Yeah. Then make sure you can before you try.
So then what do you say? So like, for example, I get a lot of conversations and calls. Obviously, I know your son, play basketball with my son. I know a lot of these boys in their 20s. Luckily, our kids are in pretty good spots, but I get talking to a lot of their friends sometimes that they hit the trifecta of debt, right? Between credit cards and car loans and other debts and whatever the case may be, they didn't have someone like you and I giving them financial advice. What is a way for them to start saying, okay, I'm putting my stake in the ground right now. I'm saying enough is enough. I don't want to be in this situation. And I start trying to head, they're listening. They're doing the right things now. They're trying. Where would you tell them is a great place to just sort of get started in sort of saying, it's time. I'm going to listen. I want to do the things you're telling me to do.
Just do it.
Right.
I mean, it is never a wrong time.
Right.
With today's access to technology and to account vehicles. Right. And I don't know all of the little mini firms that, you can open up an account online and you can buy 1/10 of a share of this or 1/10 of a share of that. But that's a get rich quick thought process. Right. You want to buy 1/10 of a share of, like I said, a good index fund. You want to use an ETF, right? And you want to buy into Standard & Poor's 500. Yeah. That's where I have my son. He puts his retirement money into that every month. And we talk about it. And, he's like, I don't want to talk about it because that's your job. And I'll look at it when I'm 60. Yeah. Okay, that's 30 years away. We'll just keep plugging away. So, but you can't do that if you have debt. All right. If you're paying off credit card debt at 20%
or more,
you're losing 20%. Right. And to pay that off, you just earn 20% on your money.
This is the conversation I have with them. So I always look at, and I have a little cheat sheet of the top 11 things I think you need to do to get started. And the biggest one, and I think in some ways in today's world, because when you and I were in our 20s, it wasn't all automated like it is now. I think in today's world, what happens with kids is they get a paycheck, but they don't actually get the paycheck. It auto deposits in their account. I remember used to getting an envelope handed to me on a Friday, go to the bank and deposit your check. So they never see the money coming in because everything is on a swipe, whether it's a debit, a credit, card. Like they never see the money. They never feel the pain of the spending. So it's all like auto pays, all my utilities, all my bills, everything's set up on auto pay. And if you're not used to knowing what's coming in and what's going out, then they don't know if they're net negative every month. I have said to people, I honestly think for the first 30 or 60 days, if someone says, I really want to do this, how should I do this, Brian? I honestly, in some ways, feel like if they would, literally, you're going to get your paycheck automatic deposit, that's fine. But if you literally just took a pad of paper and wrote down what your bills were, what your expenses were, every time you spent money, put actual cash in your pocket, so you had to reach in your pocket and spend your cash rather than charge it on a credit card, and you started to feel the money going in and out of your life, I think they would have a much better sense of, oh my God, I spend a lot more money than I thought. No different than if you and I were saying to somebody, hey, I want to lose 30 pounds. Write down every piece of food goes in your mouth. You start to realize real quick, oh shit, I eat a lot more than I thought, or the wrong things. And so I think there's that starting point. Because like you said, it's always that game between, I get the question a lot of, hey, I've got a credit card at 30. I mean, I was meeting with one gal. She had 2 credit cards at 30 and 31% interest, but she also then had a 401k at work with like 40 grand in it. So like you were doing one thing that was smart, but then you're also doing one thing that was horrible. Luckily, the balances weren't that big on those accounts. But you know, it's like, how do I manage all this process?
You bring up a really good point. In today's age, they're not going to do that.
Right.
And my concept for investing is open up an online account.
Right.
Have them take out that amount of money off the top every month, $100, $50, whatever, right out of your bank account, and have that thing set up for automatic dividend reinvestment. They don't see it.
Right.
Because when you want them to write the check for $100, it's like, oh, there's a really cool hat and that shoes and that outfit. And so there's some pros and cons to that. The concept of writing down and seeing a budget's very important because if you're automatically getting paid and you're paying your rent, your mortgage, or whatever it happens to be automatically, most people are that way. We don't see it anymore. I haven't seen a dollar bill, and my wife won't let me hold a dollar bill because I spend it. And then she says, "Where did you spend it?" I don't know.
And the easy part, I tell people, if they don't really want to go through that process, what you can do is just get a pad of paper,
absolutely,
and go back to the last 90 days.
Yeah,
and you can have your last 3 months budget in a heartbeat.
You need to see it,
and then you would know what the thing is. So when we go talking about that, I look back at some of the mistakes I made. Obviously, the obvious one you and I would both agree was we wish we started younger.
Yep.
I think if we could start younger, that would be a for sure thing. You and I have both been basically our own bosses, worked for ourselves for at least 25 years. So we haven't had that actual punching the clock kind of thing. But what would you look back on and saying, man, I wish I would have did this differently or started sooner? Or what would you say is that biggest mistake that you maybe made?
Well, my biggest mistake was using debt, credit card debt, very early on. My first investment in my personal life was at the age of 25, 26, I think.
Right.
Where I started investing in a mutual fund that my father and his very good friend had started.
Right.
And I had put $2,000 into that mutual fund in, I think it was July or August of 1987. And then we had the first big, huge market crash in October. And I watched that $2,000 go down to like $1,500. And had I understood the value, well, I did. I kept my automatic monthly deposits,
right?
But I didn't double down. I didn't say, okay, I'm going to take $1,000 and buy $1,000 more after this big crash,
right?
When that was a big V recovery and it would have been worth, a very large amount of money. But I didn't do that because I was paying off credit card debt.
Right.
And so when I look at the biggest mistakes I made, two, I think, one, the credit card debt, and the other one was when I was younger in this business, trying to think I could make get rich quick schemes like options and strategies like that.
Yeah.
And, in the markets, we talked about it earlier, in every transaction, there's a buyer and a seller. Okay. 2 weeks ago, the sellers were losing and the buyers were making, and they knew that. And so in an options type of environment where you can manage thousands of shares versus hundreds of shares, there's a winner and a loser on every transaction. Somebody goes to zero and somebody makes money. And that's only for those people in that lane that know that business and can watch it 24/7. Can do that. So I don't, and I think another pitfall to today is the news. I think they've got to turn the TV off. And my wife brought up to me this morning an article, and I said, that is a complete fake article.
Yeah.
That is not true in any sense of reality at all. And so, I'm seeing the most brutal media reporting in the last 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just asking myself, God, how counterproductive that is. Just do your thing.
And Martin, you see it everywhere. I know you're not big on social media, but I see it everywhere. It's funny. We're going to make a video reacting to some of the advice people are giving to other people. And I know for me, like, we opened up our real estate company in 2005. So the next 5 years was the worst real estate economy in my adult life. And so I wouldn't say I would do it over. That was a mistake, which is bad timing sometimes.
Right.
But then you just stayed in the business all these years and ended up working out long term. And the cool part for us is those first 6 or 7 years in our real estate business, we rented a building. But then eventually, when everyone thought we were crazy, right as that recession ended in 2010, 11, we then bought a building.
Right.
And luckily, we had the money to be able to come up with and do that. And that turned out to be one of the best things we ever did. So sometimes when you see these crazy market variations, that's when the opportunities arise.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about here, is that when the market crashes, it's not a time to go wiggy.
No.
Especially in your 20s.
No.
It's a time to say, how can I grab another 50 or 75 or $100 and get it in here over the next 30 years? It's just phenomenal what that will do. And when you look at the charts, right? The charts from 1900 to 2024, they go up. Now, in between that, there's 2 points
in the road.
There's also a lot of bumps in the road, but they go up.
And you see that in real estate as well. I mean, obviously everyone knows in that 06 through kind of 09, real estate went tanking, but any homes now, 20 years later, are worth substantially more than they even were at the peak of the market in 2005.
Yeah.
So you just got to stay the course, play the game. I know. How do you kind of stay consistently sharp? I know business worlds for you and I have changed dramatically in our careers, because I know, like, for example, when I first started in real estate, the internet didn't exist.
Right.
And so, like, that's how long we've been doing these things. And so as, you know, certain fundamentals don't change, but as our business and what we do and how we do it changes, how do you stay up to date, relevant, sharp in trying to be able to then coach up other people on what advice you want to give them?
Reading.
Yeah.
Education. I mean, making myself, I have a job where I need to know what's going on.
Yeah.
But I have to read between the lines into the reality. So in 2008, 2009, when my 75-year-old client came in tears, I said, this is a crazy overreaction. I know you're scared, but just be patient.
Yeah.
Continue. Well, I need to get out. Well, if you get out, that's going to take $60,000 of income off your table. What do you mean? Well, your income didn't change, just your market value did. You're still making 60 grand on all these investments per year, but the investments have gone down. And you stay the course, and by 2010, 2011, I was getting significant thank yous. It's being educated on the realities, talking, mentors, find a mentor. Like, when I go to real estate, I look to you. When you go to finance, you look to me. We mentor the reality. Hey, this doesn't make sense. And I go, yeah, it doesn't, but here's what you got to look at, A, B, C, and D. And then you walk away going, oh my God, I could have so easily made a mistake that, wow, just having a knowledge source or being able to get good information sources. A lot of the fundamentals of wealth accumulation are the same. They go back to it's time. I was very sad to see some of these young people sell their homes and put all their money into cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And then these cryptocurrency exchanges went bankrupt with all their cryptocurrency. It doesn't happen in the markets because of the protection.
Yeah.
But why would you do that? Because you're looking for a get-rich scheme. If somebody like MicroStrategy, who's buying thousands of Bitcoin every week, if they lose it all, guess what?
Yeah.
They still have their multi-million-dollar homes. They still have their, to us, you can't get rich quick. And staying sharp means staying smart.
And this goes back to, so what we're trying to do today is obviously give some advice to some younger people.
Sure.
And what I always tell them is just make your own plan. What your own risk threshold is, what your own definition of wealthy is, what your own life wants to, what you want your life to look like. It's not the same for everybody. So if someone else is willing to go ruin their family life because they want to start their own business for some sake and work 80 hours a week or 100 hours a week for 20 years to be worth $1 billion someday, hey, good for you. That's their business. But if you say, hey, someday I'd like to just have enough passive income to generate $10,000 a month so I can take my one vacation and hang out with my grandkids and babysit 3 days a week, do what works for you and not worry about what everybody else is doing.
Everything is specific to you.
There's a lot of people I call fake rich. I mean, they might have nice houses and nice cars, and then you sit down and look at their actual information, and they're like, they're leveraged to the hilt. They're right on the brink of missing 2 paychecks, and they're broke and filing bankruptcy. And it's like, so don't always judge the book by its cover. But when you're talking to young people, similar stuff you're saying to them, or, what would you say? I just think you got to just put your own plan in place. I just think people don't pay attention.
Well, yeah, I mean, education, make yourself educated on what you want to do and what the pitfalls of what you want to do are. But you can't overcome material. There's a lot of peer pressure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of movies out there in the financial world that talk about peer pressure, driving the Ferraris and having the gold watches and blah, 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 blah. If that's important to you, good luck, but you're probably not going to achieve any sort of quality of life that you're happy with.
Right.
And is quality of life and a good relationship and good kids and good friends, is that important to you? Because nobody wants to be around that person that knows it all, has everything.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, oh my God, did you hear what happened to Johnny? He lost all of his everything.
And it goes back to reading books again. So like if someone wants to see what your normal, everyday, average millionaire looks like, go read The Millionaire Next Door.
Sure.
And it talks about with the white pickup truck and people you wouldn't even know were wealthy and some guy with a beater 30-year-old truck worth millions and millions of dollars because they're doing all the things behind the scenes because they don't care what anyone else thinks.
Brian, I don't take accounts
that
are $1 million unless they're the millionaire next door.
Right.
I have several millionaires. They're the nicest.
Yeah.
They're the most pleasant. I have fired $1 million accounts because they're horrible people.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Money doesn't make you happy. I tell people all the time, all money does is expose the kind of person that you were. So if someone is watching this and they don't know where to start, they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling anxiety, they're like, oh my God, I'm 25 years old.
I haven't started yet.
I haven't started. I got a car loan. I got $10,000 worth of credit card debt. What can we tell them in order for them to say, okay, today's the day. I'm putting my stake in the ground. I know I would tell them to go download my little 11-sheet checklist and start off and say, hey, let's get out that pad of paper, as silly as it sounds, and let's figure out where we are at this moment in time. Here's the starting point. So then that way going forward, you just put it yourself, I don't ever want to go back to that position. It's almost like just saying, hey, what would your guidance be them? I know things I say. I'd love to hear what you say.
Simply this. It's never too late to start. You can always change. That's the nice thing about where we live.
Yeah.
You have the right to change your path, and you can do it at an instant. Download Brian's 11-point checklist if you need that, or maybe you have your own checklist, but don't panic.
Right.
Just because you didn't start doesn't mean you can't start. And just because you think you're behind, you're not. That's the biggest misconception too, is that, it's just too late to start, so why even try? No.
Don't do that.
Do it.
Yes.
But you got to do it by saying, I make $2,000 a month. $200 has to go to you, into your retirement account. Roth IRA. Non-taxable. You don't get to deduct it. You're making $2,000 a month. You don't need to deduct it.
No.
Get your Roth IRA funded and do it $200 a month. And then next year, try for $300 a month. Then try, but gosh, it's a retirement account. I can't touch that money. Exactly.
That's the whole point.
That's the whole point, to let your wealth accumulate until a point at which you need it. And my father, he saved and saved and saved and saved, and then he retired, and then he passed away a year later.
Yeah. The point is to be able to enjoy it as soon as possible.
You along the way.
Yeah.
So the earlier you start, the more financial freedom you have. But don't get stressed because you haven't started. Start.
Well, and this goes back to, I tell people sometimes, when they go with that whole rent versus buy, sometimes it's good to be house poor, because people who are bad with money that will spend every loose dime they have, sometimes if their house payment's a little bit of a stretch for them, or their auto payment on their retirement's a little stretch for them, is almost not a bad thing, because then there's not this extra money laying around. It's like they can't leave $10 in their pocket. It's burning a hole. They got to spend it. So sometimes those are good things too. And for people that even might be more my age at 54 or in their 40s or even older than me, it's still not too late to start. Because if you don't start, you're just going to work forever. Well, and that's not really a great plan either.
You made a comment for people who are young watching this.
Yeah.
I hope people who are older are watching this, because if you're 40 or if you're 30, if you're 50, it's not too late.
No.
I know that my father didn't really get a good jump on his savings until he was 52, 50, when he was a retired CPA and didn't like that. And he got into the financial world and he retired very wealthy.
And so you say that because I did all the right things, Martin.
Right.
And then we opened up that real estate company at the worst possible time when really a lot of people are making their money in their 30s. And to keep the doors open, we were digging in our pockets and getting out credit lines.
Right.
I'm in my late 30s and I had to start financially over. And then we killed it in our 40s and made up for all the stuff we screwed up the first time. So it's like, it's not too late to do it. Obviously, you might have to have a little different plan. You might have to try to find a way to make a little more money. You might have to find a way to be a little more strict. You might end up living a little below your means. And again, I know, Richest Man in Babylon likes the 10% thing. I'm a big fan of once you can afford it, it should be 15, 20, and even more if you can do it.
That's exactly right. And it grows as time goes on because you did start in your 20s at 10%.
Yeah.
In your 30s, it can be 15%. And in your 40s, it can be 20%. And in your 50s, it can be 30%.
Yeah.
Because as your mortgage is going away and your expenses.
And hopefully making more.
Hopefully you're making more. It's just a process of time. It's long term. I'm a constant optimist. Even when the markets are at their worst, I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
What should we do? Should we change? No, we shouldn't change. Should we sell? No, we shouldn't sell. I said, do you have an extra 50, 75, 100 grand? We should probably put that to work right now. I don't often call clients and say, hey, if you got some extra money, but I have a couple that say, hey, let me know when. Just because I'm in the business doesn't mean I know.
No.
But this was an obvious jump here over the last 3 weeks. 2,000 point down day, 1,000 point down day. We went from, almost 10,000, 11,000 points down from the high.
Yeah.
Come on.
And this is what I tell people. So you're looking at two guys here who both went to the University of Nevada, who are both pretty decently financially in great positions. Well, we're not geniuses. We didn't do anything crazy. We just learned these things a little younger than most. Had fathers that literally kind of guided us through the process. Good mentors. And then just kind of worked the plan. The one thing my dad taught me, and of course, you go back to your question, the mistakes I've made, I didn't listen to my father.
Yeah.
I didn't listen to my mentor.
And he hated credit card debt. He had an opportunity to buy 10 acres of land in Hidden Valley in Reno, Nevada, back in like 74, and his share would have been $5,000.
Yeah.
He wouldn't borrow money to do it.
Yeah.
He would not do it. He hated debt for home only and maybe a vehicle back in the day when that was, now you can get vehicles for pretty cheap.
Yeah.
The point is I didn't listen to my mentor and, listen to those with knowledge.
Yeah.
We don't know it all. We all learn together.
Yeah. But I would say go find someone who's living a life that looks like something you'd want to live.
Sure.
And go ask them how they did it.
Yeah.
And that's the way to go figure it out. So Martin, I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
We have these conversations on a regular basis, usually at 7 a.m, eating breakfast somewhere.
This is fun.
But I just want people to know and hopefully feel encouraged to know that they can do it. It is not that hard. It is not that complicated in all reality, as long as you can find a way to be just smart and thoughtful about what you're doing. So I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
If you have questions, by all means, reach out to us. Send us your DM, send us your comments. If I can't answer the question, Martin can't answer the question, we'll find someone that can answer the questions for you.
The answers are out there.
They're everywhere. So we appreciate you watching, and hopefully you learned something from two people that are just trying to help a few others.